Hi, this is Denise from Force Market Farm, and I am finally getting back to the Spinner's Book of Yarn Design. I'm so sorry for my absence. I haven't been feeling all that great, and so I'm going to try to make this video without so much coughing. Okay, so now we're into the section of the book. We're still in chapter 1. We're talking about fleece. And of course, as you know, this is my favorite part because I love fleece. And I know it's fairly possible to spend a great deal of time and never actually work with a raw fleece. Now, you probably could spend your entire life and never really work with a raw fleece. And I think it would be a little sad because there is so much to learn from processing a fleece from scratch to finish. And there's a lot to learn about fleece and fiber itself when you start from actual fleece. A lot of times by the time you get roving, the way it is commercially processed, I know to me it feels like it's basically all the same. You could put, a merino down and a fin down or something like that, and some of those fine breeds you couldn't even tell apart, or some of the long wools you couldn't even tell them apart looking at them in roving form. Some of them you couldn't tell a fine breed from another breed in roving form. And so when it's commercially processed, and I mean like big commercial process, the fiber is generally scoured really hard and carbonized so that it can get rid of the most of the VM, the vegetable matter. I just think it loses character that way. When you're doing mini mills or smaller commercial mills, a lot of times there's a gentler process, and fibers aren't always carbonized, so you may get a different texture to it. Okay, so at any rate, it's an adventure when you are working from raw fleece, but it's also a bit of hard work. Now, when you're choosing a fleece, there are some factors you want to take a look at, because you don't want to just like go gun-ho and just get whatever the first fleece you see, because you could find yourself in quite a bit of trouble that way. And the number one factor I look at when I look at fleece, of course, is cleanliness. Okay, now I am willing to get down and dirty with a lot of fleece, or at least when I first started, I really was into that. I mean, I didn't mind really getting down and dirty. As I go on, I find that I have less tolerance for, some of the issues that you're going to see in fleece. So, when we're talking about cleanliness, we are talking about not just poop tags or dirt or oils or that kind of things. We're also talking about the amount of vegetable matter that is in the fleece. Okay, so most of the lanolin and the dirt, suet, and poop tags that go with it can be skirted out and they can be washed. So this is some merino. And this particular bag was merino skirtings, which I got, of course, an excellent price, or I wouldn't have gotten it. And there are these at the bottom of the bag. And when they were skirted, since they were fairly long, they were included in the bag, but they are fairly dirty. So if I was looking over a fleece, and a lot of the fleece was like this, that's a fleece I would pass up. But in this case, of course, that will wash out. So I might even say, hey, I'm going to take that really greasy, kind of yucky fleece. VM is really important, though, especially when you're talking about fine fleeces, because if you have a fleece that is filled with a lot of, look at these little fine VM bits. This stuff, even after you wash it and you get the lanolin out, especially in these fine, crimpy breeds, it's really hard to get a lot of this stuff out, the really, really small bits. So if you have a fleece that is full of lots of little small bits of VM, or any parts of a fleece that is full of lots of little small bits of VM, you might find that you don't want that fleece, or you want to skirt out that part of the fleece. Just some thoughts there. Of course, it all depends on how you feel. You know, for me, I'm going to accept this small challenge. Uh, I will wash this. I will see how clean this comes. Then I'll decide whether this is even worth me processing. You can see it falling out all over the book. Whether this part is worth me processing or not. It depends on the staple length. If the staple length is really good, sometimes I will go ahead and flick out as much as I can from those pieces anyway. Okay, so at any rate, you also want to see if the fleece is well skirted, because you're buying fleece by weight. And if the poop tags are still in it, if there's a lot of shorts and second cuts in it, that stuff adds weight to the fleece, and you want it gone, or you're paying for a bunch of stuff you can't use. So consider the price of the fleece. If it's a really cheap fleece and it's not skirted, I mean, it's not a big deal. I've gotten bags from shearers. It's like $5 a bag. There's 5 pounds of fleece in there. You know, if I lose half the fleece because it's bad skirtings, it doesn't really matter so much to me. But if you're paying, you know, $30 a pound or more or whatever, you're paying a good price, especially if you're shipping it. You want these fleeces skirted as well as possibly can be skirted. Okay, next you want to think about is fleece type, because you know there are some popular breeds, and you know you can kind of gravitate towards those, or you can look at some of the other more specific breeds, but have a pretty good idea of what type of fleece it is. Is it a fine wool? Is it a long wool? Is it one of the down breeds or down-like breeds? Is it a primitive breed? Because each of those different breeds have different characteristics when it comes to crimp and staple length, handle, when it comes to elasticity. Each one of them are different. So when you're looking at these fleece types, you want to look at the amount of crimp it has. So I have right here a fine wool breed, and I'm not sure which one this is because it was part of a sampler from a friend, and it was unmarked. But for comparison, here we go again. I gotta make sure I'm reading the bag right. Make sure that's not the Cormo. Okay, so this is merino. For comparison, let me get that a little closer. Let it zoom in. And this right here, it looks a lot like. It actually looks like the same fleece, honestly. Look like they came from the same sheep. So this is more than likely merino or a merino X. I always call merino X. The merino crosses, you know, the merino cross breed. So either that's merino or it's one of the merino cross breeds. And look how devastatingly clean this fleece is. It's very possible that that was coated. Don't know. But at any rate, if you look at the crimp of the merino compared to the crimp of this Cheviot, okay? Totally different. And what that tells you is that this is going to be a softer wool, and it's going to be a really like springy cushion type wool. Now these Cheviot is a down-like breed. It's really a hill breed, but it goes into the down breed categories. And while it is not as finely crimped as merino, it has nice crimp. And so see how it's a nice stretch to it. It has nice crimp, and it's going to have quite a bit of loft. But you can just see the difference in the crimps per inch for that. So they're going to spin up differently. Okay, the merino is going to take more twist than the Cheviot is when you're spinning for the crimp. And even though you might not be in your mind spinning for the crimp, you're going to notice that the merino is going to want more twists to hold together than the Cheviot would need. And if I was using a long wool breed, like the curly ones I really love, it would need less twist than either one of these would. And if you give it the same amount of twist as you would a merino, you're going to wind up with something that feels like rope. So consider that the wools with the more crimp per inch are going to need more twist to hold together. And then correspondingly, the breeds that are hair breeds, like alpaca and Angora. The Angora is technically called wool, but it's a hair breed. They have less scales on their shaft, so they also require more twist to hold together. Okay, too much information. Let me go back a bit. Okay, anyway, so staple length is also a determining factor on how you spin a fleece. Okay, usually breeds that have a shorter staple length, and the book considers anything 3 inches and below as kind of a shorter staple length. They are going to spin with, usually you want to prep them in a carded form and spin them woolen. A lot of the short fibers are best that way. They're best carded. And the long, because you can't really card. I mean, you can, but if you're looking at like a long wool and you've got like 6 inches, I mean, carding is not really efficient. You could always cut it up, but it's not the same. And so, at the same token, combing is not the most efficient way to handle the shorter wools either. So combing gives you a worsted prep, and so those yarns are traditionally spun better worsted. Notice I'm saying better worsted. And carding gives you a woolen prep, and traditionally those fibers are yarns that are spun in a woolen style. You can do whatever you feel like. I'm just saying that generally that's kind of how that works. So staple lengths do play a part in how you spin things, which is a lot of times why I say that I'm not a big fan of the shorter wools, because the way I like to prep and the style of yarn that I tend to spin for weaving, the carding and woolen spinning is not really what I'm aiming for. So I tend to stay away from the shorter fibers, which are harder to get an actually real worsted spin, worsted drawn, worsted spin from. Okay, so that's where I'm going with that. All right, now, like I said, when you're looking at those things, you're looking at the cleanliness, you're looking at whether it's skirted, you're looking at the fleece type, staple length, considering what you need it for and all that kind of stuff. Also, you want to test the lock for a fleece if you have this opportunity. And let's say you got the fleece anyway, before you get the chance to really test these things. Test it because you'll need to understand how to process it. Okay, so you take the lock and you pull it, give it a tug. And what you don't want to happen is you do not want the fleece to break up, and you don't want to hear crackling. Okay? You want to check for damage. So I'm looking at this fleece. The tips are a little yellow, but they're not breaking off. That's good. This isn't breaking off. I'm pulling. No break off. I'm pulling. Okay, it's not snapping. It's not breaking. We're good to go. There's no signs of damage or sickness or illness or anything in this fleece. That's wonderful. That's great. Okay. Now, let's say that I was pulling this fleece and I was getting a lot of breakage. That doesn't mean that you can't use the fleece. What that does mean is that if you send this fleece to be commercially milled, what will happen is the fleece will break under the tension of the machines, and it will cause neps inside of your neps and noils inside of your fiber. And also at home, if you are drum carding fleeces and they have breaks in them, you will get a lot of neps and little noils inside your fleece. So you really do want to be aware of the condition of the fleece. If you can, prior to buying, and if not, after you bought, and let that help determine how gently you process it. I'm still looking at this. This is gorgeous. Okay, now, I'm trying to keep this short, but there's so much to talk about when you're talking about fleece. But this is just evaluating fleece on the skinny. Inside the group, If you have questions, we can really get down and dirty when it talks about fleece. Okay, so washing fleece. And everybody kind of learns and has their own method for washing fleece. And I like someone asked in the Choose Your Own Breed Adventure Facebook group, they asked, do you wash all your fleeces the same? And the answer to that is yes and no. As you learn about different breed types and their characteristics, you learn that there are certain fleeces you have to treat certain ways, or you're going to wind up with a disaster. Okay, and so although we all have our own ways, the one thing that we really, really do not want to do is felt a fleece. And if you've ever felt a fleece, you understand. And if you haven't yet, at some point you will felt a fleece by accident in some way or another. And basically, in order to avoid felling a fleece, here's what you don't want. You don't want heat and agitation. Heat plus agitation equals felt. Okay? Or if the wool is very warm and it is shocked with cold water or cold air, that will cause felting. So when you're washing, you want to avoid doing those things. So before you wash, make sure that you skirt the fleece, get rid of any debris like leaves or things like that are sometimes in the fleece, burrs, bugs, any big things that are in the fleece. You want to take out big pieces of VM. I like to shake my fleeces, and sometimes that does get out quite a bit of VM. It also gets out shorts and tags. If you have a table set up, I have a skirting table, and I put it on top of the skirting table and I just kind of bang it around. And that actually loosens quite a bit of debris and shorts and second cuts and anything that wasn't properly skirted out. Okay, well, I'm sorry. I wanted to say you want to test it first, like we did to see there. And you also want to test it to see if it felts. If you can look it up in the Fiber and Fleece and Fiber, I always get that wrong, source book. It'll tell you the breed characteristics of that breed, whether or not it's one of those breeds that are prone to felting. And for the most part, the fine fleeces and the long wools are going to felt marvelously. So be careful. If you have the down breeds, that's one of the characteristics, is that they don't felt very well. So you're good to go. So just keep that in mind. Test that out before you go into it, or know your breed. Okay, so anyway, going back, after you test, then you skirt, then you sort. And I do this all the time. I go through my bag, and if there are different textures, sometimes the belly wool might be a different texture from the prime, or the neck wool might be a different texture. So you might want to sort those out, because dirt is going to come out of them differently, and they may felt differently. Okay, there's some parts that may be more felt resistant than other parts. And then pre-soak, and I'm a grease spinner, but I want to say that spinning in the grease does not mean spinning in the dirt. So I wash my fleeces. I just don't scour them, and that's a whole different story. So they soak, and even when I'm spinning in the grease, I still have a pre-soak. I usually pre-soak in cold water. It sits overnight. Then I pour that off and strain the fleece, and then it goes into an actual soak. And depending on the breed, depends on whether or not there's soap inside the soak, or whether there's not soap inside the soak. And then after it soaks, it may take 1 or 2 or 3 soaks. It depends on the breed, and more soap or not more soap. And then it actually, that is my wash part. So wash is after the pre-soak. So if you are going to scour your fleece, you do a cold pre-soak or a warm pre-soak. You rinse that off, and you do your wash. And there are lots of ideas about what to wash fleece with. Everybody has their do's and don'ts. The biggest suggestion is do not use laundry detergents, because they tend to have enzymes in them that are to fight stains. And those enzymes can damage the wool, so we don't want that. And then after the wash, you want your rinse. Be careful with your rinse. You do not want to take your fleece out of a hot wash, put it in a cold rinse, and felt your fleece. You don't want to do that. So be careful with that. And then lay it out to dry. Spread it out as much as you possibly can. Shake it a little bit. Kind of get those locks a little open. That'll help it dry faster. And basically, that's how you wash a fleece. Like I said, I am going past my time. And so I'm going to stop here. But join us in the group if you're not here already. And we will go into more detail about some of our favorite ways to choose fleeces, to test fleeces, and to wash fleeces. That's it for this segment. The next segment after this will be my favorite segment, fiber prep and basic spinning. And then after that, we'll be able to move on into different types of yarns. Thank you for watching and listening. And like I said, if you haven't joined us, join us in the Spinner's Book of Yarn Designs Facebook group. It's called Spin by Design, and we are submitting our pictures and answering questions there. I hope to see you there. Thanks a lot.